All right, well, welcome to Brooklyn Park Library. This is a neighborhood in the northern part of the county that is talked about a lot in the plan that we're looking at today, and where there's a lot of opportunity to improve the quality of life and both the built environment and the natural environment of this community. But we are here to introduce the draft General Development Plan, Plan 2040 for Arundel County, and to launch a 45-day comment period. Normally, it's not very big news when a General Development Plan draft comes out, but in this case, it is big news, and it's something that I personally ran for this office for this moment. And so thank you to the staff at OPZ for doing such a great job. But it's also, it's about the future of the county. I have to start out by saying that what we witnessed last night in the presidential debate probably made a lot of people a little sick to their stomach and not inclined to engage with government at all. And what I love about this process of Plan 2040 is that it encourages our residents to look to the future. And when we look into the future and we set aside our current arguments of today, party politics doesn't really exist. And we tend to agree on most things. We tend to all want the same kind of future. So this process started before I even took office under the previous administration. When I ran for this office, I went around the county to all of the small planning areas of the county and waived the old plan, the small area plans and the 2009 General Development Plan. And my complaint wasn't what was in the plans. They were pretty good plans with a vision of protecting our natural environment, doing smart growth, getting cars off the road and alternative forms of transportation. My gripe was that those plans got stuck on a shelf and were not implemented. And the real decisions about land use were getting made during the subdivision approval process. They were getting made through modifications to circumvent our county laws. They were getting made often because the land speculators and the developers had made political contributions, and then the elected officials were making decisions to make those donors happy, and those decisions did not reflect what was in the plans. So I can understand if the residents of this county sort of shrug or roll their eyes when we say we're working on a new general development plan, but this plan is different. Not just in the content, but this plan is different in that the implementation side of it is virtually impossible to get around. So I have here, there are actually two parts, the big part and the little part. The little part is the one that you really want to read. The big part is a lot of the background information that's also interesting reading. But the plan, the little part has the last half of it is literally a report card that is going to get used. Every single recommendation in this plan has next to it responsible departments to implement, the time frame for implementation, and performance measures for how you determine whether or not the recommendation is being implemented. So if you're a politician, whether you're a county executive in the future or a county council member, and you don't like what's in this plan, you're still going to be held accountable because the residents of this county are the ones who are developing the plan. And they're going to hold the politicians accountable. So the way that's worked is that there have been, we'll get some specifics about the details of how much public participation there's been, but we have had dozens and dozens and dozens of community forums, town halls, listening sessions. The most recent version of this was electronic because of the pandemic, Plan 2040 at home. this really sophisticated GIS map-driven process where people could go in and make comments on land use designations, which are not zoning. There were over 4,000 comments just in that part of the process, and those have been integrated to a large degree into this draft. And we're launching a 45-day comment period. The initial timeline had a 30-day comment period for the residents of the county to comment on this document, and we extended it to 45 days, primarily because community groups need time not only to read and absorb this document, but to convene and talk to each other about what recommendations they have for changes. I do want to note that there have already been changes made in this document based on what we heard in the Plan 2040 round of 4,000 comments. In particular, I just want to note that the corridors, the transportation corridors of this county are probably our biggest challenge. They're traffic challenges. Route 2 and Route 3 corridors are the worst. Route 3 corridor might be the one where, because of recent development, unplanned development that was really sprawl, is the worst. I actually was on a helicopter going down the Route 3 corridor, the police helicopter, early in my term, and I just couldn't believe that we were still building these big box stores with these sprawling parking lots and just paving over beautiful land and trying to take what should be a transportation corridor like a highway and turn it into a commercial district. And so there's been some concern about how those corridors are described. Are they growth areas or are they not growth areas? No, they're not growth areas, they're management areas. And so that's why what's really important about this plan is that there will be no upzoning as a result of the general development plan. We want community engagement at a much more community level before any upzoning gets done or any rezoning. So the comprehensive zoning, which was always done right after the GDP in the past by just the politicians, that goes to the regional plans. So there will be 9 regional plans in the county immediately after the general development plan gets approved by the council. And those will each have implementation committees, well, first citizen committees to develop them, and then implementation committees to follow up on those. And that's where decisions get made about zoning. But it's also where decisions can be made about what people want a village center to look like, what we're going to do to deal with the traffic problems before we do additional development in an area. The Route 2 and 3 corridors, we're finally getting to the point, we believe, where we've put money into the budget, nearly $30 million of county funds to address traffic problems, to address failing intersections. And we've got the state highway folks finally, because we're dangling our money in front, we've got them talking about actually an MOU to do the work on those corridors so that we can confront some of the traffic problems. But we have no intention of increasing development in areas where we have those traffic issues. So we're going to need the community engagement to be part of that. I thought that this plan might include down zoning, reducing the zoning classifications. I was convinced by our planning officer who's done that in other counties that that's not the way to go. That usually when you do that, you end up with lawsuits that you have to defend. And instead, there's a thing called performance zoning, where we take our values and we put them into legislation, and we identify the conservation areas and the conservation features, and then we put into law that those areas are going to be protected. And so there's a lot of legislative work that's going to follow this general development plan. And in fact, a lot of the recommendations in here are legislative recommendations. And if we pass the laws, if we legislate according to our values, I believe that we're going to take this county and make it a national model for how you take sprawl development, slow it down, and start to do the kind of development that is transit-oriented, that gets cars off the road, and most importantly, I think, is protect the natural environment, the beautiful natural environment of Anne Arundel County with our 530 miles of coast. And at the same time, make it possible for our children, our grandparents, people who work in our restaurants and our hotels to live in this county with housing that they can afford in an economy that actually works for the people, so that we don't have everybody commuting into the county and out of the county for their jobs. So It's really about our future. It's really about the overall health and wellness of our residents in the future. And I have to say, that's why we have with us 3 representatives of our Youth Advisory Council. It's a new group that advises me on policy. We have Hector Thompson from Broadneck High School. We have Asada Hanif from Chesapeake Science Point. And we have Tara Kim from Chesapeake High School. So thank you for being with us. And I am going to encourage this commission to focus on planning for the future. These folks, if they're 17 now, will be 37 at the end of this 20 years. And it's going to be their future that we're planning for. But I also want to bring up 2 very important people. We have our planning officer who oversaw the process of writing this, Steve Kai Ziegler. But before that, we've got Lori Rhodes coming up, who's our deputy CAO for land use in the county. And Lori, we got from the Office of Plan and Zoning, who has been there for decades and has seen how things were done in the past. And I think she's going to probably convince you that things are changing in Anne Arundel County on land use policy. So thank you. This here.
Thank you, County Executive. Good morning. My name is Lori Rhodes. I'm the Deputy CAO of Land Use. And yes, I am coming from the Office of Planning and Zoning, but what inspired me to join the Pittman team is his vision for the future. I was there in the office and I witnessed that our plans being put on the shelf. And what that does, it allows us to look at our implementation codes, which are the development and zoning codes, and easily modify and bury them. When you do that, that leaves a lot of irreversible damage. So I'm here to use my legislative skills to make sure that we implement this plan. So we're not going to continue to do the practices of the past. We're going to implement these plans. I'm going to be using all of our land use departments, recreation and parks, inspections and permits, planning and zoning, Department of Public Works, and Office of Transportation to make sure we implement the vision to make this the best place for all. I'm so excited to be with the Pittman team, and I'm looking forward to using my legislative skills to make sure we implement these plans, working with the implementation teams to make sure that all the legislation that's needed to implement these plans and make sure they're followed continues on into the future. So I'm very excited to be with the Pittman team.
Thank you, Lori. I'm Steve Kai Ziegler. I'm the Planning and Zoning Officer for Anne Arundel County. I'm really pleased to be here today because for me, I've lived in the county since the late 90s, but I came back to work here for Mr. Pittman because I think we had a shared vision of what we could accomplish together. And so for me, this is a great opportunity and a big day. You know, we look at these volumes. I was able on the way in here today to stop at the printer, so you're seeing the first 2 printed copies. Not that we want to use a lot of paper for the plan, but just knowing you have the first draft of it, and it's a really good plan. Is it set in concrete? No. As the county executive said, we've extended the time period for public comment from 30 to 45 days. Really important time period for those in the community to go online to Plan20 at aacounty.org, review both documents. There's mechanisms within that website to submit comments. This is the time now for the public to share your thoughts. There's been a lot of that in earlier work that led up to the creation of this plan. I mean, we've had over 4,000 hits, over about 1,000 people submitting individual comments. We've had a huge amount of input from that dates back over almost 3 years, with many meetings with citizen groups and an appointed citizen advisory committee. And we're at the point now, this is kind of actually the start of the official process, having a draft that folks can look at. So it's very important that the public look, read, and share your thoughts. This plan as presented isn't done. We're fully expecting in a transparent process that if we listen well and we understand the issues and concerns and can do something about them, we are going to make changes in this document throughout its evolution towards adoption. Many time periods and approaches that people can use to do that. So that's one of the most important things I can impart is please read the documents and share your thoughts. I think the county executive actually did a fantastic job of describing some of the key elements in the plan. Some of the main things that we're trying to do. Here's simple concepts: protect our communities, preserve our existing green spaces, direct growth to revitalization areas as opposed to developing in green spaces, upgrade and modernize our transportation system. We know we're way behind in that category. The county executive talked a bit about routes 2 and 3. He's right. That is arguably our single biggest issue in Anne Arundel County. But it appears that we are actually now moving in a direction where improvements can actually happen. One of the things you'll read in this plan versus earlier, I'm going to say policy area designations or terminology, is we're not identifying the Route 2 and Route 3 corridors as future growth areas. They are management areas. Significant departure for that terminology and what can happen in the future. The other thing we want to do is we want to support workforce and affordable housing. This plan is oriented around those themes and many others, but those are important concepts. I think the other thing to keep in mind, both the county executive and Lori touched on this, is the relative importance of implementing and how one implements. This plan, you'll have 45 days to review. We need to make changes based on that public input. At some point later in the fall, it will go in front of the Planning Advisory Board. It's likely there will be changes that they will ask to be made. And now those will all happen before a bill is prepared and introduced to the council. And I think we have every expectation that the county council will have changes they also will want to make. So the idea is to get this thing through its process, if possible, before the council has to go heavy into the budget season. As the GDP is being developed, we recognize that it's the start of a major planning effort in Anne Arundel County. It sets the footprint, the foundation for how we'll do other planning efforts. The general development plan really is it. It's a general development plan. It's like doing planning from 30,000 feet. The detailed planning based on the regions, and you'll see that in front of me, will occur as separate processes following the GDP. And I want to stress a couple key points. With the general development plan, there will not be comprehensive rezoning. That is being reserved as a part of each of the region planning process. As the general development plan is being moved towards adoption, we will create, through an application process, an implementation advisory group. And as the CE talked about, a big chunk of the GDP is a blank report card. It describes what implementation needs to occur, when it needs to occur, and who needs to do it. We want to give that to the public so that you can see and measure how well you think we're doing. One of the most frustrating things as a professional planner is to work on a product that you know will never be implemented. And I think there have been efforts to do that in Anne Arundel County, but we haven't done it at a level that we need to. And we're trying to institutionalize that component in this planning process. So we'll have an implementation advisory group that will help keep us honest, meaning the county council, ensure that we actually implement those recommendations, those policy things that come out of the GDP. The other thing we're going to be doing late fall, early winter is the next stage of planning process is that we have to prepare 9 individual region plans. We have the resources to start with 3. Each of those region planning processes, we think, will take 18 to 36 months to prepare. And the reason we can't be more exact is anytime you include the public in a meaningful way, it affects the timeline of the product that eventually comes out. Each of those first 3 region plans will have a citizen advisory committee. And I'm going to look behind me now to these young people, because one of the things through an application process we really need to have citizens who participate in our planning processes that are much more diverse than we've been able to achieve in the past, much more holistic in their thinking, and I'm going to use a term, much more futuristic. We need people who will help us think about where we're at now and where we need to be, as opposed necessarily to thinking about the things that didn't work well in the past. So that's going to be a key component. As a result of each of those individual region plans, there will be a comprehensive rezoning process with each one, and it's likely that each one of those region plans will have legislative, I'm going to use the word text amendments, but changes to the regulatory process or regulations. With each one of those region plans, we're also going to create a series of citizen implementation advisory committees to ensure each of those region plans are implemented. So that's kind of the long story of the planning process. Well, we thought we had that set up well. But that describes kind of how the planning processes that we're envisioning over the next 6 to 8 years, and it's a lot of work. We're really excited to be in a position to participate in it. So thank you for your time.
Any questions or questions? Yeah.
The implementation committees and the small plan advisory committees. Mr. Kaiser just said that you want those committees to be more diverse. How are you going to make sure they're more diverse and actually representing the needs in the specific communities?
Well, one thing that we need to do a better job of is, I think, articulating to residents why this matters and how their own personal interests might be impacted. The comments that we've got on the earlier Plan 2040, we know that they were predominantly white, older, and from certain communities that are well organized. And so I know that now that we have Lori Rhodes working out of our office, who's going to be working to usher a lot of this through for us, she has actually suggested that we go to, for instance, the Caucus of African American Leaders, NAACP, and the United Black Clergy organizations to reach the African American community. We've got our new Immigrant Affairs Commission, and we're going to be going to them, and we're going to be asking them to let people know that this process is going on and encourage them to participate, and younger people, and encouraging them to participate. And so we have to just do a better job of letting them know where their interests might be impacted by this.
Okay. Are there any opportunities for people who don't have access to a computer to comment on the plan?
Yeah.
Again, Steve Kai-Ziegler, Planning and Zoning Officer. We hope so. I mean, one of the ways to do that is through the libraries in certain fashions. It is going to be more difficult and more challenging. It has been for us because this is the first time I've been out in a meeting setting in months, because everything we do is with a Zoom meeting. Part of it's going to be finding ways to provide copies of the plan. It may have to be that we have to mail paper copies to folks, and we may have to have a phone conversation, take down notes of things they observe. But I'm going to say one of the things we've found with COVID, people are finding ways to communicate with us, whether it's a cell phone, a telephone, writing us a letter, a memo, talking to a friend who has a computer or a cell phone. So we haven't found yet really any instances where a citizen who wants to participate with us hasn't been able to. I'm open to suggestions of ways to improving that, though.
We will have printed copies soon, and we'll have one in each library, and people will be able to make appointments. The libraries are not open, but they're doing the appointment process, so to be able to do it.
Good to know. I'm going to keep asking questions, if that's okay.
You guys don't have to film this part of you, especially if she stumps us. Just
Can you give some examples of the legislation that's recommended in the draft?
I'll give a couple, and you can give more.
Sure.
One is one that we've been talking about already, which is MPDU, moderately priced dwelling unit set-asides, or some people call it inclusionary zoning, where when a developer is doing housing, a significant size housing development, that some percentage of the units would be required to be affordable for people at low or moderate income. And this is done in most of our neighboring counties. It's been talked about in Anne Arundel County for decades and been recommended. Even the Chamber of Commerce talked about the need for this in the past. So, so that's one. Yeah.
Laura will and I'll have one. We'll have
Okay, we all have one.
Lori Rhodes, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer. Like we said, the 2009 plan sat on the shelf, so now we have to clean it up. So that's also part of our legislative strategy, is to clean up some of the code provisions that weren't dealt with the 2009 plan. We also are studying the current Plan 2040, and we're anticipating what environmental regulations need to be passed. So we have a robust list of plan to update the code, and that's how we're going to move forward.
And I'm going to give you one more example, but I think one of the most important things to get across is the plan is a plan by itself. It is not law and doesn't have the form of legislation. So in order to implement the plan, you do it through zoning maps and you do it through legislation. One of the other ones that will come forward immediately following the plan is kind of a new way to do development review. The county executive used the term performance zoning. You can look it up. The creator of it is a fellow named Lane Kindig. It's been around a while, but basically what it does is it requires a property owner, a developer who owns property, to inventory the existing natural resources on the individual property, environmental features. You start with the resources that exist, and that's mapping. But in order to make sure that you know what is actually there, you have to field delineate with professional environmental scientists. We'll be able to check that. You determine what the environmental features are on a site before you start planning how you'll develop it. And you develop the site around those environmental features. That is not how we have done things in Anne Arundel County for decades. It's very common, or has been, that development was proposed and the environmental features were a second thought, a third thought, and they were there to be disturbed in order to increase the yield in development. That will be a marked departure in the way that we do development review. Whenever you see the built environment, in theory, it had a site plan, there was a subdivision, there was a building permit. We'll radically change the way we do development review in the future if we're able to get it through the county council. It will be a big departure though. So those are some implementation tools that are kind of coming. We have to be working on those now because we want to be off and running as soon as the GDP is adopted. Thanks.
Last question, I think it's for you.
Can I add one more on that though? And I think this is important that the council is doing legislation on land use all the time, and some of the bills that we've had recently have actually been reflected and called for in previous GDPs, in the 2009 GDP. And I don't want people to think that all of this is about stopping development from happening by any means. For instance, the Glen Burnie overlay bill that the council just passed is a way to facilitate, make it easier to move forward on redevelopment that there's a consensus that everybody wants. So part of the trick is moving the market to the kinds of development that we want and away from the development that we don't want. And so sometimes that means making the system, greasing the skids for development that we do want, so that there are fewer restrictions.
So you'll have to read the plan.
Can I have one?
And I will be able to share that in a moment, what's in the draft, but yeah, we'll do that. I want to reaffirm something the CE just talked about, in the sense that the Department of Planning and Zoning, we are not set up to approve every development application or deny every development application. Our job is to apply the plans and the codes as they're currently written. If a development application comes in, it's a permitted use. They're not disturbing environmental features. We have an obligation to approve it, and we do. I think the key thing here is I think we've kind of lost our way in the past, in that we didn't apply those codes as well as we could. So part of it is applying the codes as they exist today, which creates a better system, but also recognizing the failings in those codes and making those adjustments into the future. So thanks.
And I'll give you a little teaser on the areas in which come first. As you can imagine, that's pretty controversial. And there are two options listed, right? There's one that was presented by the Citizens Advisory Committee that I have to actually thank for all of their hard work. They should have been mentioned in the beginning on this. Elizabeth Rosberg, who chaired that, and the group that worked very hard on this. But so they have one proposal. The staff has a proposal based on different criteria, and we fully expect that this is going to be something that the county council is going to end up making the decision on. Because ultimately, it's a political decision about. Some people are going to want to go first, and some people are going to want to go last, but probably people are not all going to agree on that.